Hello everyone. Welcome to the Podcast.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Have you ever faced a big decision, maybe choosing a new job, launching a project, or even just picking the right software for your team and felt completely overwhelmed, like you're just staring into this fog of options and uncertainty?
Oh, absolutely. You're definitely not alone there. Decision making, it's maybe the most fundamental thing we do, shaping pretty much everything. But getting from that point of, uncertainty to making a really confident, effective choice, that's a skill. And yeah, it's not always straightforward.
Totally. And today we're really taking a deep dive into the sources you've shared with us, trying to cut through some of that fog. Our mission is basically to pull out the key insights on how to make better decisions, figure out why it feels so hard sometimes, and find practical ways you can navigate those complexities.
Think of it like building your own personal toolkit for making choices. We'll look at the basic steps, explore different approaches you might take depending on the situation, shine a light on those common tricky bits, and unpack some strategies to help you deal with them.
So where do we even start? The sources, they lay out this surprisingly simple, systematic process. It's almost like a mental checklist you can follow. What's the very first thing?
Right. The absolute starting point, and it's one people often skip in the rush, is defining the decision. Before you do anything else, you've got to get really clear on what problem you're actually solving, or, what opportunity you're trying to grab. Why now? What exactly are you hoping to achieve?
Right. You can't hit a target you haven't even defined. Makes sense. The sources had that good example, like realizing your team's communication is messy, or you can't track projects. The real problem isn't just needing a tool, it's ineffective collaboration. So the decision becomes finding software that solves that specific thing.
Precisely. And once you've got that target locked, step 2 is gathering information. This is all about arming yourself with knowledge. What data do you need? Where can you find reliable info, or maybe expert insights? What are the relevant facts?
This is the research bit. Sticking with that software example, it means actually looking into the options. Teams, Slack, Asana, Trello, whatever, reading reviews, maybe asking colleagues, digging into the features, the pricing. You're trying to build your decision on something solid.
Exactly. With that info, step 3 is identify alternatives. This is like your brainstorming phase. What are all the possible ways forward? Think wide, beyond just the obvious ones. And for each one, start jotting down the potential pros and cons.
So listing out those software options, that's your menu. Don't just grab the first one.
Yeah, exactly. Don't settle too early. And then comes step 4, weighing the evidence, or you could call it evaluating the options. This is really the analytical core. How well does each option actually help you hit those goals you set back in step 1? What are the short-term versus long-term consequences? What are the risks involved? The sources suggest maybe using a matrix here, comparing each option against your key criteria like features, cost, usability, how well it actually solves that original communication problem.
Like knowing Slack's good for chat, but maybe weak on project stuff. Or Teams fits well with Office 365, but could be complicated to set up. Trello might be simple, maybe too simple. Basecamp's powerful, but maybe pricey. You're really scrutinizing how each one stacks up.
You're putting them under the microscope. And after that careful comparison, step 5 is choosing among alternatives, making the actual decision. Based on your evaluation, which one seems like the best path to meet your needs? Which is most practical right now? And importantly, have you paused to think about other viewpoints before you make that final call?
So you look at your analysis and decide, okay, Teams looks like the best fit because it does communication and project tracking and works with our other tools. It's a decision based on the steps before.
Which then naturally leads to step 6, taking action, implementing the decision. A choice isn't really made until it's put into practice. What specific steps do you need to take? Who's doing what? What resources do you need, and what's the timeline?
This is the get it done part. Buying teams, setting it up, training people, making it real.
And finally, step 7, often forgotten but crucial. Reviewing your decision, monitoring and evaluating. Did it actually work? How will you measure success? Are there specific metrics like maybe communication frequency improves or projects get done faster? How do you get feedback from the users?
Yeah.
And if it's not quite right, what tweaks are needed?
Right. Closing the loop. Checking in after a few months. Is communication really better? Are projects clearer? Getting feedback, maybe even having a team meeting, like a retrospective, to talk about what worked and what didn't. The sources mentioned using KPIs, key performance indicators, or even setting up early warning systems to spot issues quickly.
Exactly. It's all about continuous learning and refining things, that 7-step framework. It's a really powerful foundation, especially for more structured, deliberate decisions.
But here's where it gets, more nuanced, right? That process is the base, but how you move through it, the speed, the input you get, that can vary a lot. The sources dig into different models and methods.
Right. Think of the steps like the recipe, but the models and methods are like different cooking styles. Sometimes you need a quick microwave approach. Other times it's more like slow roasting something carefully.
Okay, let's dig in some of those styles. The sources talk about the rational model.
Yeah, this one lines up almost perfectly with those 7 steps we just discussed. It's very methodical, analytical, driven by data. Its big strength is aiming for the most logical, optimal outcome by really evaluating everything thoroughly. The catch, it can be slow and it needs a lot of good information, which, let's face it, you don't always have.
Right. So what if you don't have all that time or perfect data?
Well, that's where something like the intuitive model might come in. This relies more on your gut feeling, your instincts often built up from years of experience rather than a formal analysis. It's super fast and can be really effective in high pressure spots where you just have to decide now. And the downside, it's harder to explain why you chose it, and yeah, it can definitely be swayed by unconscious biases.
So sometimes your gut knows best, but you got to be careful.
Exactly. Then there's the creative model. If the solution isn't obvious, this approach is all about generating new, maybe unconventional ideas. Great for breakthroughs, but it definitely takes time and often the right kind of environment where people feel safe to think outside the box.
The incremental model sounds a bit less dramatic.
It is. It's about making small, gradual changes instead of one big leap. This lowers the risk because you can test the waters and adjust as you go. But it's obviously not great if you need a really big, fast change.
And the heuristic model, what's that about?
That's using mental shortcuts, rules of thumb, things you've learned work okay in the past to decide quickly. It's efficient, saves mental energy, great for routine stuff or less critical choices. The danger is that those shortcuts can sometimes lead you down the wrong path, introduce errors or biases without you even noticing.
Interesting. The sources also mentioned a more structured one, the Room-Yetton model.
Ah, yes. This one's a bit different. It's really about deciding how to decide, especially when a group is involved. It helps you figure out if you should decide alone, that's authoritative, get input first, then decide, consultative, or have the whole group decide together, group-based. It depends on things like urgency, how much info you have, and how important buy-in is. It's a meta decision, really.
Got it. And then there were 2 that felt very realistic. Bounded rationality and satisficing.
Yeah, these really acknowledge the real world. Bounded rationality basically says, look, we rarely have perfect information or unlimited brain power. We're limited. So instead of killing ourselves searching for the absolute best option, we look for one that's good enough or satisfactory given the constraints we have. Satisficing is very similar, often meaning you pick the first acceptable option you find, especially if time's short or it's not a super critical decision. They're practical, but yeah, you might miss out on something better.
So, knowing these models gives you options for how you tackle those 7 steps. But the sources also talked about who makes the decision, especially with others involved. Different methods of participation.
Exactly. Who gets a say and who has the final call? The sources lay out several methods here. First, there's authoritative, sometimes called command. Basically, one person decides, alone. This is fastest, best for maybe a crisis, or when one person genuinely holds all the key expertise. Speed is the pro. The con is the risk if that person is missing something or if others feel shut out.
Like, yeah, a fire chief making a snap call, or a CEO ordering an urgent recall. Quick, decisive.
Precisely. Then you have consultative. Here, the leader asks for input, gets opinions, gathers data from the team, but they still make the final call. Good for bringing in different perspectives before the leader chooses. Takes a bit longer than authoritative, but can lead to a more informed choice.
Like a manager asking the team for ideas on a project direction before deciding the final path.
Right. Next up, democratic or just plain voting. The group discusses, then votes. Majority rules. Works well when you need to reflect the majority view and include people. The potential downside is it can ignore or override minority perspectives that might be valuable.
Like a committee voting on a new policy or something.
Correct. Then there's consensus. This one's the most collaborative. The group talks it through until everyone genuinely agrees on the way forward. This is ideal when you absolutely need everyone's full buy-in for it to work. The reward is usually a really high-quality decision and strong commitment, but wow, it takes time, effort, and good facilitation.
Getting everyone truly aligned sounds tough, but powerful if you can manage it.
It really is. The sources also touch on the analytical method, lots of data crunching, systematic evaluation. It overlaps a lot with the rational model, but really emphasizes the analysis part, often for complex, high-impact decisions where you have time. And participative, which is a bit broader, just meaning multiple stakeholders work together throughout the process. Common in community projects, things affecting lots of different groups.
Okay, so we have the steps, the models for approach, and the methods for participation. But wow, that's a lot of options. How do you actually pick the right path for your specific situation?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? The sources stress that it's not one size fits all. You need to consider several factors.
First one seems obvious. The complexity of the decision itself.
Yeah, simple routine stuff doesn't need a massive analytical effort, but complex, thorny problems, they demand more structure, more digging to make sure you're not missing crucial angles.
And time available, that's always a big one.
Huge. If you need an answer right now, you're probably leaning towards authoritative, maybe intuitive if you have the expertise. Got plenty of time. Then you can afford the slower, more thorough approaches like rational or consensus.
What about the information you actually have?
Key question. Got lots of solid, reliable data. Analytical methods look good. Information is patchy, maybe unreliable. You might need to lean more on expert judgment, intuitive, or use consultative or participative methods to try and get more info from people.
Stakeholder involvement too. Who needs to be on board?
Absolutely. If getting buy-in and commitment from everyone affected is make or break for success, you probably need inclusive methods like consensus or participative. If you can just tell people what to do and they'll do it, authoritative might work culturally.
And the level of risk and uncertainty.
Yeah, how high are the stakes? Big potential downsides. Might call for more cautious, structured approaches, rational, incremental, plus some serious risk analysis, lower risk. You can probably afford faster, maybe less exhaustive methods like satisficing or heuristics.
The expertise of the decision makers also plays a role.
Is there one person with deep experience who can trust their gut? Or is the knowledge spread out? Then you need something more collaborative or analytical to pool that brain power.
We also saw organizational culture mentioned. That makes sense.
Definitely. Is your workplace very top-down? Authoritative might be the norm. Is it super collaborative? Then consensus or participative approaches might fit better and be more accepted. And finally, the impact of the decision. Is it a big strategic long-term thing or more tactical, immediate? Strategic choices usually need more time and care, analytical, consultative. Tactical stuff can often be quicker.
The sources actually give a nice little framework for this, using urgency and impact.
Yes, that 2x2 grid is really handy. For decisions that are urgent A&E high impact, think a real crisis speed is critical, even with high stakes. That's where intuitive, heuristic, or authoritative often fit, like that firefighter choosing which door to kick down.
Makes sense. If it's urgent but low impact, speed still matters, but a mistake isn't catastrophic. Maybe satisficing first good enough option, or incremental tweaks, intuition, or just delegating it, like picking the office coffee brand quickly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, for non-urgent but high impact, you've got time to be thorough. This is prime territory for the rational model, analytical methods, maybe consultative. Think developing a long-term business strategy or making a huge investment.
And the last box, non-urgent and low impact. Time's not an issue, stakes are low. Here you might use bounded rationality. Good enough. Maybe participative methods for team morale on small things, or even consensus on something non-critical just to build the muscle. Choosing the theme for the holiday party, perhaps.
Using that grid, it can really help you quickly sort through which approaches are likely the best fit for whatever decision is staring you in the face right now.
So that gives us a map, a compass. But let's be honest, even with those, the path isn't always a clear highway. Decision-making is often messy, right? Full of ambiguity.
Oh, absolutely. The sources are very clear about this. They highlight a bunch of common challenges that create that fog we mentioned earlier.
Like just having incomplete information. That happens all the time.
Yep. You rarely have every single bit of data you wish you did. You might be launching something new without perfect market research, forced to make, educated guesses.
Or dealing with uncertain outcomes.
You can analyze until you're blue in the face, but you can't perfectly predict the future. Investing in some brand new tech, inherently uncertain. You don't know exactly how it'll pan out.
Conflicting goals feels like a constant battle sometimes.
It often is. Trying to juggle competing objectives. A company wants max profit and minimal environmental impact. Those can definitely pull in opposite directions.
And the big internal one. Subjective judgments and biases.
Ah, yes. Our own mental shortcuts, our preferences, they can unconsciously warp our choices. The sources mention things like confirmation bias, only looking for info that backs up what you already think, or anchoring bias, getting stuck on the first number you hear. They can really distort things.
Thinking you know the answer before you even start looking, or getting fixated on that first price quote. Yeah, I see that.
Exactly. Then there are complex interdependencies,
Where one choice sends ripples everywhere in unexpected ways, like changing your price affects sales, sure, but also brand image and what your competitors do. It's all connected.
and we can't ignore emotional influences. Our feelings play a massive role. Fear of failing might make you shy away from a smart risk. Or maybe overconfidence makes you leap before you look properly. Ambiguity in the data itself can be a problem too. The data you do manage to get might be fuzzy, contradictory, or maybe just easy to misinterpret. You draw the wrong conclusion from it. A rapidly changing environment makes things even harder. The market shifts, new regulations pop up, technology evolves. Things can change fast, making a decision that looked good yesterday suddenly seem less optimal today.
Stakeholder conflicts seem almost guaranteed in groups.
Pretty much. Different people, different departments, they often have competing interests or priorities. That creates friction. Employees want better pay, shareholders want bigger returns. Classic conflict. And finally, that lack of historical information when you're charting totally new territory.
Launching a product that's never existed. There's no past data, no trends to look back on. You're flying blind to some extent.
Yeah, navigating all of these challenges, that's a huge part of actually making good decisions in the real world.
Okay, so if ambiguity is basically unavoidable, the goal isn't to wish it away, but to manage it better. What do the sources suggest for tackling these specific types of fog?
They offer a whole toolkit of strategies, often matched to the type of ambiguity you're facing. For incomplete or ambiguous data, well, the obvious first step is try to get more. Do more research, talk to experts, use data visualization to see patterns, and crucially, cross-check info from different places. Verify, verify, verify.
Okay, What about dealing with uncertain outcomes? You can't predict the future.
No, but you can prepare for different futures. This is where scenario planning comes in, mapping out best case, worst case, most likely outcomes. Doing risk analysis helps you understand the potential downsides and maybe how to mitigate them. When you've got conflicting goals, you need to get ruthlessly clear on priorities. Explicitly rank your objectives. Do some trade-off analysis. What do you gain? What do you lose with each option? Talking to stakeholders helps find common ground or reveals which goals are truly non-negotiable.
And pushing back against our own subjective judgments and biases. That sounds hard.
It is. The sources suggest using structured tools like those decision matrices or multi-criteria methods to force a more objective evaluation, rather than just relying on gut feel, unless that gut is backed by deep, relevant experience, of course. Getting multiple diverse perspectives involved is also huge for counteracting individual biases. And honestly, just being aware of common biases like confirmation bias, that's a massive first step.
Right, just knowing they exist helps you watch out for them. What about those complex interdependencies?
For that, you need to think systemically. Zoom out. Use tools like flowcharts or system maps to visualize how things connect. Sensitivity analysis can show you which connections or factors have the biggest impact if they change.
And emotional influences. How do you manage feelings?
Awareness is job one. Recognize your own emotional state. Is fear driving this? Excitement? Then step back. Having a trusted colleague review your thinking can offer that crucial objective check-in. If the environment is changing fast, you need to be constantly scanning the horizon. Set up processes for continuous monitoring market trends, competitor actions, tech shifts. Build flexibility into your plan so you can pivot if needed. Adaptive planning.
Stakeholder conflicts require active management, I guess.
Definitely. You need to map out who your stakeholders are, understand their interests, where the potential clashes are. Skills like negotiation, mediation become really important. Inclusive processes help too. And if you have no historical information, when it's totally new, you look for analogies. Are there similar situations in related fields? Even historical parallels. Look for benchmarks or patterns elsewhere that might offer some clues, however imperfect.
The sources also threw in some broader skills and really practical tips that seem to apply across the board.
Yeah, things like developing systems, seeing the big picture, emotional intelligence, critical thinking skills, risk management, conflict resolution, they're all foundational. Plus, having a tolerance for ambiguity, being okay with not knowing everything, and cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift your perspective, those are key mindsets.
And the tips were super concrete, like
Yeah.
to define the problem better, use the 5 whys technique to dig down. For generating options, try things like Scamper or just keeping an ongoing idea bank.
Right. And for evaluating simple scoring or weighting or more formal MCDM multi-criteria decision-making, definitely consider worst-case scenarios. When actually making the choice, especially in groups, things like dot voting can quickly show preferences. Or maybe assign someone the role of devil's advocate to deliberately poke holes in the leading idea.
For implementation and follow-up, use that plan, do, check, act cycle. Track your KPIs, maybe set up early warning systems, and always do retrospectives, learn from what happened.
And for the overall process, things like the Delphi technique for extra consensus, or just using a decision calendar to make sure you allocate enough time. And maybe the biggest cultural piece, fostering an environment where it's actually okay to voice unusual ideas, where people aren't afraid to challenge the status quo. That's where real breakthroughs can happen.
That really leads nicely into how this all works when it's not just you deciding, but a whole group. Group dynamics add this whole other layer of complexity, but maybe potential too. The sources describe different ways groups tend to interact when they're making decisions.
Yes, they identified a few distinct styles or approaches. One focuses on bargaining.
Sounds competitive, like negotiation.
It often is. The main goal is persuading others, building support for your position. It tends to be a bit win-lose, using tactics to highlight your idea's strengths and maybe downplay others. It can get you a decision quickly in some contexts, but yeah, it risks leaving people whose ideas lost feeling unheard or dissatisfied long term. Might create temporary alliances rather than real unity.
So you get a decision, but maybe damage relationships or commitment along the way.
Potentially. Another approach centers on scrutiny.
This sounds more analytical, like the rational model applied to a group.
Kind of. The focus here is on rigorously testing and evaluating all the options using logic, data, evidence. It emphasizes being systematic, maybe using scoring matrices against agreed criteria. It helps reduce individual bias, gives you a clear rationale. The downside can be very time-consuming, needs good info, and you risk getting stuck in analysis paralysis, never actually deciding.
Thorough, but potentially slow and frustrating.
Right. A third approach was labeled competition.
Wait, how's that different from bargaining? Bargaining sounded competitive too.
It's a subtle distinction in how the sources frame it. Bargaining seems more about persuading for your pre-existing position. This competition model sounds more like problem solving through critique and refinement. Like, maybe the group generates creative ideas, and then they compete based on merit, subjected to fast, critical feedback and structured evaluation to find the best one. It's about stimulating innovation through challenge, but needs careful handling so critique doesn't become destructive.
So ideas battling it out, sharpened by debate. Interesting.
Yeah, think of it that way. And finally, perhaps the most constructive approach, group problem solving.
This sounds like it's aiming higher than just picking an answer.
It really is. The goal here is genuine consensus. Everyone truly buys into the decision and commits to it. It requires deep cooperation, really active and empathetic listening, building on each other's ideas, and focusing on common goals over individual wins.
That sounds like it would build incredibly strong teams.
It absolutely does. This approach builds trust, strengthens relationships, creates a sense of we're in this together. Over time, it can make an organization more resilient, foster continuous learning, and develop leadership skills throughout the group because people feel genuinely invested.
Wow. Understanding these different ways groups can interact seems vital. You probably see people fall into these roles naturally, right? The persuader, the critical question asker, the bridge builder.
Absolutely. Recognizing these dynamics allows you to be more intentional about guiding the group towards a productive outcome, maybe even consciously choosing an approach that fits the specific decision and the group's needs.
Man, we have covered a ton of ground today.
We really have, from those fundamental steps that provide the scaffolding for any decision, right through to all the different models and methods you can use depending on the context and who needs to be involved.
I've looked squarely at the challenges, the ambiguity, the biases, the conflicts that make it feel so foggy sometimes, and unpacked a whole bunch of practical tools and strategies to help manage all that.
Yeah, it's clear that making good decisions isn't just about having the facts. It's about having a process, understanding your options for how to approach that process, and equipping yourself with ways to handle the uncertainty and the human element that always comes into play.
It's not about finding some magic bullet that makes every choice easy. It's more about building your capability, your confidence, to make choices that are more informed, more effective, more often.
Which, at the end of the day, leads to better results, whether that's in your job or just in your life generally.
So as you're thinking about your own choices after listening to this, here's something to mull over. Which specific step in that 7-step decision process do you tend to skip or maybe just rush through the most? And what might change, what might shift if you gave that particular step just a little more focused attention the next time you face an important decision?